What do you think? Okay. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Kay Reads and Crochets. I feel like fantasy is a genre that overwhelms a lot of people, and for somebody who loves fantasy novels, I promise you it doesn't have to. So today I wanted to give you some recommendations for my favorite short, quick, easy fantasy novels that don't require a lot of brain power, that don't require a lot of background understanding of the genre, that are maybe even just short books that you can get through in a couple of hours. And hopefully if you're somebody who's a little intimidated by fantasy, this might be a way for you to dip your toes into the genre and see if you find something that you like. So I think one of the best places to start is the subgenre of cozy fantasy. And this series is kind of the quintessential cozy fantasy series, and I feel like it took the world by storm a couple years ago. Legends and Lattes and Bookshops and Bone Dust. We follow our main character, Viv the Orc, who is an adventurer by trade, but who is looking to kind of settle into something a little bit quieter and cozier. This is a series. Legends and Lattes was published first, but Bookshops and Bone Dust is actually a prequel. And something that I think is really cool is, like, I don't feel like you have to read these in any specific order for the moment. If more books come out, my opinion might change. I think you can get the same benefits out of reading the stories in either order. And that's something that's really cool that we don't get to see a lot of. This series is really fun because it's got a lot of references for people who are familiar with things like Dungeons and Dragons or a lot of like the fantasy tropes. If you're looking for the references, you will find them, but if you're not looking, that's okay, because you're still going to be able to understand the story. The next recommendation I have for you is another series, Daughter of the Pirate King and Daughter of the Siren Queen. So, full disclosure, I've only read the first book in this series so far, and I believe there is, I don't know if it's a spin-off or a sequel, but it's not following the same character. So this follows a pirate captain, Alosa, who is tracking down pieces of a treasure map. This is mostly the adventure aspect of a fantasy book. This is a lot of traveling, a lot of pirate stuff, a lot of action, not so much the mythical, the fantastical, the magical, but there are a couple of elements in here that do fall under that category. This is a YA novel, so it's a pretty easy read. There's no spice. I think it's a great option for somebody who is looking more into the adventuring aspect of fantasy, or even for YA readers who want to kind of dip their toes into something a little bit more fantastical. The next series that I have for you is also a little bit more fantastical. We're kind of like building in all of these fantasy elements, and that is the Folk of the Air series. The first book is called Cruel Prince. I have seen it on Kindle Unlimited. I don't remember if I got it on Kindle Unlimited or if I borrowed it from Libby, but I have seen it on Kindle Unlimited. And then the second book is called The Wicked King. The third book is called The Queen of Nothing, and there are some spin-off series as well. This is definitely starting to lean into a lot of those fantasy elements, specifically the fae and fairies. You have a lot more fantastical creatures, you have a lot more magic, but there's still a lot of really fun adventure-y stuff. There's some sword fighting, war, political stuff. So I think this is also a good series for somebody who's wanting to try more fantastical books. This is starting to become more of a high fantasy as opposed to a low fantasy. And when we talk about high fantasy versus low fantasy, high fantasy is like very mythological, very fantastical and mystical, usually lots of magic elements, usually lots of like creatures, whereas low fantasy is almost like a medieval historical fiction with like a sprinkle of magic. So Cruel Prince and the Folk of the Air series is definitely getting more into those high fantasy elements, but it's a YA read, so the delivery does not feel as overwhelming. There's also a romance that's a central plot point throughout. It's a pretty popular series on BookTok. I think it's a good option for people who are trying to get into more high fantasy elements. The next series I have is one I talked about recently on my YouTube channel, which is the Forge and Fracture series. Again, this is one that I have not finished the entire series, but I really enjoyed the first book in the series, and it's something that I want to finish at some point this year. This series is a really cool mixture of fae, Shakespearean London, and West African mythology. There's a really strong FMC called Joan who has magical powers, specifically over metals and iron. I think this series is really good for people who are looking for more of maybe even like a gas lamp fantasy, which is another subgenre of fantasy. It leans a little bit more historical fiction or maybe even historical fantasy. Usually takes place in Victorian or Edwardian London, but again, this one takes place in Shakespearean London. Gaslamp fantasy usually takes a lot more elements from our world and puts them into a fantasy setting. Forge and Fracture is also a YA series, but there is some strong language, so I would recommend this book for more of like an older teenager as opposed to like a middle schooler, but that's just my opinion. If you're looking for more spicy fantasy recommendations or something that's got more of the mythical creatures or the fantastical creatures, I have two recommendations for you. The first one is the Falling for Fables series. This one's really cute. They're usually pretty short. There's a couple spicy scenes. There's usually some fae and some magical creatures. Some of the books have competition elements. Some of the books have adventure elements. And I think they're pretty fun. This is another series that I've only read a couple of books out of, but they are pretty fun and exciting. They're quick, they're easy, they're short, they are spicy, but they're fun. Along similar lines, and also a series that I spoke about recently, is the Mead Mishaps series by Kimberly Lemming. Again, these are fae and magical creatures, really funny writing, not a lot of crazy world building that you really have to dive into and really dissect, but it does take place in a fantastical world. Very spicy. I'm gonna hold your hand when I say this. Very spicy. Keep that in mind. But these are also really great because they're short, sweet, funny. I love Kimberly Lemming's writing. Again, she has recently become one of my auto-buy authors, and I think she's just super fun. If you're looking for more of a modern fantasy or something closer to magical realism, I recommend The Cat Who Saved Books. This tells the story of a young man who inherits his grandfather's bookshop. He has some difficulty dealing with his grief and his loss, and in fact, he really withdraws from his school life and his social life until a cat appears in his grandfather's bookshop and takes him on a whole bunch of magical adventures to save books from readers and book owners who are not treating them properly. This is a love letter to books and to reading. I absolutely loved this book. As you can see, it's super, super short. When I picked this up, I thought it was going to be a sci-fi, but it wasn't. It is very fantastical. It's almost a little bit Alice in Wonderland. This was originally translated from Japanese. This was just super sweet. I really liked this one. The last series that I have on this list, I first read this as a teenager and I really, really loved it. And it's a series that I think about on a regular basis. And my friend actually just got me a copy of the first book, which is called A Great and Terrible Beauty. This is a series that follows a girl named Gemma Doyle who begins finishing school in Victorian London. They stumble upon this magical world in which they have magical powers and they can do things that they can't do in their real life. Again, almost Alice in Wonderland, almost Chronicles of Narnia-esque. I really liked this series. I'm super excited to jump back into it. It is a little bit thicker of a book. It's a little bit chunkier of a novel, and it is a trilogy, so there are 2 other books, but it is a YA read, so it's not very labor intensive. This is again where I would kind of consider like a Gaslamp fantasy. It takes place in Victorian England. Usually the magic has ties to the world that it's in. And I can't wait to dive back into this. I'm really excited about this one. I hope that I gave you some good recommendations that you can try out. I hope you find something that you like. This is a style of book recommendation videos that I might try more of, specifically within like micro tropes or micro genres. I don't know. Tell me how you feel about it. I know that there are genres that I'm very much intimidated by, and so I hope that having some recommendations for a genre that might be a little bit out of your comfort zone, help you try new things, help you try new books. This is a series that like I would love somebody else to make for me, specifically for sci-fi books, because I'm intimidated by sci-fi books. So if this is something you'd like to see more of, feel free to leave some ideas in the comments. And until next time, I hope you have a great day. I hope you get to do something that you love, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.